Okay, so back in Gen 2, there was a lot of people that often asked, why did Red, as in Pokemon Trainer Red, have an Espeon on his team? Now, I'm going to kind of explain this based on what I think and maybe back this up with some more evidence with what we found over the years with prototype data. Now, before we get into that, you have to play Pokemon Reforged to really understand this. This is based on the 1997 Space World demo that was gold and silver at the time. This was what it was before Satoshi Tajiri was confronted by Satoru Iwata, who basically wrote them a compression algorithm, and they basically said that they were able to go back and redo some of the stuff as well as remake the game and all that in a way they felt was very better, rather. But in that time, though, they discarded a lot of stuff and redid some stuff too. Now, what that stuff was, we have some of it, but there's still a lot of ideas we could have been missing. But here's one thing to think about, though. So Espeon is obviously very strong, and Red also was a strong trainer. So there's no doubt that it would have worked kind of like the same way that, you see like how Red, was kind of like green at one point. Why was his Rattata or Raticate gone? Because people thought, oh, it died, but he didn't die. It just he put it in the PC. So obviously he had more than 6 Pokemon. Same thing with Red in this case. Red was a really strong trainer, and if we're to believe that he really did go out of his way to catch as many Pokemon, he couldn't stop. Like it's like the same thing with Green. He couldn't stop him. So he was the strongest at the time, but at the same time though, I mean, the Space World demo actually kind of took a different spin as far as the story goes, but I still do think Red was stronger than Green. Green was actually, believe it or not, technically stronger, but his team wasn't really anywhere close to what Red's was, even with the trainer rematches and all that. So they both were strong trainers, but Green was more of a researcher working for his grandfather after, he basically was beaten by Red. Red just basically went back to the Kanto region and was just kind of hanging out there and not climbing Mount Silver, but he was the Kanto gym leader at the time. And so here's where it gets even stranger. So he has an Espeon, but why does he have an Espeon though? Well, here's the thing with Green. Well, if you fight Green later on in the prototype data, which is technically the true final boss of Pokemon Reforge, he actually has an Umbreon. So his rival had an Umbreon, but then later on, but some of his Pokemon later were changed though. And again, probably for, competition reasons, and at the same time though they changed it because they wanted him to probably have his original team from the original game. Some of his Pokemon are still the same, like he's still got the Executor, he's still got the Arcanine, he still has the I think the Gyarados too, um and then there's a couple Pokemon that were changed. Umbreon was definitely not there. Prax wasn't there. That's the Pokemon that was Beta Heracross, and that would explain why Heracross was actually in Fire Red. That's why, if you have a rematch with your rival in the Fire Red Elite Four, why does he start off with Heracross? Because I always wondered how he got Heracross. But then I started looking at prototype data, and I started thinking, well, maybe this was based on an idea that they had before that we've never seen before. The players versus the developers. So obviously the developers would know the stuff better than we would. So that's kind of an interesting pattern, actually. But anyways, he has an Umbreon, and the Umbreon is actually supposed to be a poison type in this case. It's not a dark type, believe it or not. And it's even crazier because like Umbreon was actually supposed to be like such a poisonous, venomous Pokemon that the dark lighting that you see on it was actually venomous material that would come on the outside of it. Umbreon was basically like a tree frog that even the outside of its body was poisonous and could kill you. But somehow that wasn't the case in this case though. So but they changed it though, and it became a dark type, and it was more of like a mischief and an evil Pokemon, just a dark, chaotic Pokemon. Because keep in mind, dark type in Japanese means evil, so makes sense. So yeah, that would explain why, Red had an Espeon, because Espeon obviously was really strong, but but Espeon had the advantage over Umbreon at one point. But then they changed to Dark types, and now Psychic types don't have any effect on Dark types. You basically have to get a little clever and figure out how to get around them. So, I mean, unless Espeon, if I remember correctly, can learn Ghost type moves that are super effective against. Was it Ghost type or was it Poison moves that were effective against Dark types? I have to double check because I don't use Dark types too much. I've always been for Psychic. Because Espeon's a special sweeper. Umbreon's more of like a defensive wall, sort of. Both are pretty deadly if you know how to use them right. But, especially if you pair them up with the right Pokemon and the timing of it. You can win a lot of matches with Umbreon. Umbreon's a pretty good Pokemon, but I personally recommend Espeon, though. Espeon's really good. If you don't have too many physical special attackers. Especially nowadays, you can get like Psyshock, I believe. And I mean, even in the Pokemon ROM hacks, this move is like one of the best. You can take Umbreon's special defense, right? And now Umbreon becomes a physical attacker and a special attacker, but it uses its special attack in order to convert into physical damage. And it's actually really interesting because when I found out about that, I always wondered why Espeon was like so popular aside from its looks. But that's why. That's why Espeon was always my favorite Eevee evolution. I wish they'd bring more Eevee evolutions in. I wish there was an Eevee evolution for every Pokemon, but imagine a bug type Eevee. That would have been interesting. But anyways, I mean, even Ken Sugimori was actually making that joke at one point. He's like, what? You guys want a bug type Eevee? It's like, imagine that. Huh? But anyways, so yeah, what else? Okay, so but that was the thing though. It just goes to show you that I think his Umbreon was replaced by a Pidgeot, again, because that was the first Pokemon that he had in the Elite Four, And I think they wanted to make it more that he used his original team that we've seen. He has his Alakazam, he has his... I don't think he has Espeon at that point. No, he didn't have Espeon. That was Umbreon. And Umbreon was gone. Alakazam was gone, if I remember correctly. If not, then he still had Alakazam. Did he have Rhydon? I'm still trying to think. I mean, in the prototype, I have to play Pokemon Reforged again. I haven't played that in a while. But anyways, it's like some of his Pokemon were the same, no doubt. But some of them, there was a couple of them that were completely different. But what I also think is really weird, and this is going based on Gen 1's prototype data, but this is where they kind of changed the concept of Red. You ever wonder why Red had all three starters? And I mean, some people would say, well, you could probably catch them at some point in the game or trade them. They should have been, an extra, but they started out with the starters because they wanted you to have that at the beginning, so that you only get one per playthrough, kind of like the legendary birds, for example. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised you could catch the starters at one point, So basically, this is what happens. This is what we found out. So when Gen 1 came out, you would fight your rival, and he would have all three starters. He'd have a Charizard, he'd have a Venusaur, and he would have a different Pokemon that was what Wartortle originally evolved into. And it wasn't Blastoise, believe it or not. But then later on, Blastoise took over that Pokemon spot, and then they still took the concept of all three starters. One of those two would have those Pokemon. In this case, they changed it to Red. So Red now had all three starters: Blastoise, Charizard, and finally, Venusaur. And all three of those Pokemon are easily they're really good for their positions. They're for a balanced team, I mean, they can take out a lot of Pokemon. So that's actually pretty cool. So yeah, Green got different Pokemon, but then he later on would still keep some of the ones he had. Still had a balanced team himself, but I still think Red had a better team, and he was more leveled. So it's possible that Green still would have a lot of catching up to do if he wanted to catch up to Red in all of his years. But I think then at that point he realized he was just going to dedicate his time to research. And it was crazy because even Red was beating him at that then. He was going out more. He was seeing things. He was conquering Mount Silver and stuff like that and doing all sorts of crazy things. So I think what they did was they scrapped some Pokemon. They changed some of them around. And then they kind of came up with a concept like you would have like Heracross would have been one of the prototype Pokemon that, because Prax was a Pokemon, it was a stag beetle that Pinsir would evolve into. I think it was based on level. I think it was like level 40 something, or maybe level 38 or something like that. I had to double check. But Prax would evolve into that. But then Prax wasn't in the final version of Gold and Silver. That's why some people might probably wondering what the heck does a Prax look like. It's very interesting. And then they redid it in Heracross, and it became a stag beetle. And I honestly think the idea that they got the stag beetle idea from might have been from Mega Man X3 or Rockman X3 in Japan. If you've played the Super Nintendo version, you know what I mean. It's kind of a rare game, but it's not too rare if you played the X series. You probably find it on the internet like all the other ROMs and emulators. But basically, there's a Pokemon called, or there was a Maverick called Gravity Beetle, and he kind of looked just like Heracross, sort of, but like, he was a machine though, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that might have been where they got kind of the concept for it. Either that or the Hercules beetle, that you got a stag beetle and a Hercules beetle that these Pokemon could have been based on too. And so, because I'm trying to remember, was Pinsir like a stag beetle too, but it was like a different kind of stag beetle? I always thought it was funny how Pinsir always sleeps on its face. That's how it sleeps. I always remember the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon as sleep effects. He just puts his head down. He's just sleeping. Throws himself on the ground. But yeah, so we'd have what was it? Espeon would later be replaced by Lapris in Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I think it was because they wanted to kind of balance it out more, but they also wanted, it kind of made more sense that Red didn't have an Espeon at that point. And I think that's why they got rid of it, because they got rid of Blue's Umbreon, Green Blue's Umbreon. So that would explain why, maybe that's why they didn't have those Eevee evolutions. Because they probably figured, they were probably thinking about the rivalry they had with Yellow at that time in Gen 1, where, he had an Eevee, so, Red would go out and catch another Eevee. He probably had the one that Bill was giving him. Maybe Bill was giving out more than one, before Ethan got it. Because you could technically catch Eevees in the wild, because it's a box. It was kind of hard to find one, but I'm sure Red, he got one, and then, he just evolved it into an Espeon. So he probably in the final versions, he probably put the Espeon in the PC, his PC, and then he decided that he was going to replace it with the Lapris. Probably the Lapris that he got from the Silph. Kind of makes sense, So the Pokemon that Red had were with him since the beginning, but it was also, but that Lapras was also there as a gift, because that was like one of the last times he's seen Giovanni and whatnot. So Lapras, when he saved the Silph from Giovanni, and it might have been 3 times he saved them from the Silph, 2 times he saved them from the Silph, because there was also another time with Giovanni. This is also based on prototype data, but and who knows if it's really canon, even though it wasn't in the final versions. That there was originally the Mewtwo arc was in the Silph, the same Silph that you go and get the Master Ball. You ever wonder why Giovanni was even there to begin with? That's what he is. He couldn't figure out how to blast through that. Couldn't figure out how to make Master Balls himself. So they were trying to figure out how to catch Pokemon that without fail, of course. But that's why. So that's what they ended up coming across. So anyways, they caught. So and I think maybe even Giovanni may have very well have worked with the president, like because keep in mind Fuji himself, the guy that was looking after Marowak and all that, and Cubones, those Pokemon were very well. Their mothers were, the Team Rockets were killing one of them, but at the time though, it's safe to say that Fuji was kidnapped and brought to the highest tower, the Pokemon Tower, but It's possible that maybe that wasn't always the case, though. Maybe Fuji's story arc was even more like that. Because, like, on one hand, you know, you had Fuchsia City that was a little different, and that story kind of had something. You had Cinnabar Island, the whole manor that Mewtwo destroyed it and left that, went to Cerulean Cave. But then it wasn't even in Cerulean Cave. Maybe they just took it and transported it to the Silph Co and they locked it on the top floor, and it was like a boss rush. The only way to get through it, though, was you had to beat the Elite Four. And again, this was kind of true too, because even in the final version, you couldn't get into Cerulean Cave until you beat the Elite Four, technically. And that's where Mewtwo was. But in the prototype data, that was where Moltres was. And as soon as you got Surf, you could go there and catch him. And Strength. Keep in mind, the HMs were still in their same spot, but it was just done a little bit differently, though. So, that's what had happened. And it was interesting because, like, they changed some things around, but they kept a lot of stuff the same. And it does make me think, you know, if Giovanni was actually in the Silph Co for a second time, you know, he tells Red basically that only he knows he's there and nobody else. This would explain why we have trainer rematches here and there and throughout the series, but it might have changed throughout the, you know, whenever they decide to bring it back. Gen 3, I believe. Maybe even in Gen 2. Was it in Gen 2? Yeah, Gen 2 had it, you know, with the phone numbers, but I think it was a little bit different, though. I do like it seemed like the prototypes had the better ideas, but it just seems like they got so caught up in the deadlines and they were changing some stuff that maybe they couldn't like put all the stuff they wanted into the game, and then so they really just kind of had to downgrade it over time a little bit, or maybe they did it on purpose so then they could resell it like as the more definitive version, like Pokemon Yellow and then Pokemon Crystal and Pokemon Emerald and Pokemon, you know what I mean, or Platinum. You know, you get the idea. Maybe they did that on purpose, intentionally. I don't know. It's hard to say. But basically, there's a lot of stuff that we have never seen in Pokemon that maybe the devs really do know. And I guess depending on specifically what you really want to ask, that kind of makes sense why they might have made some of the decisions that they did. Why did Red not have his Espeon in the later versions? And that might have been why. Because you really just got to think, like, what originally started that idea? And then once you start finding out why, then you can really see. Because Umbreon is the exact opposite of Espeon at that time. And those two evolutions really came together. And I think it was going based on even Gen 1's mod, where you basically, you know, your rival got Red's Eevee, and you got a Pikachu. But, and I think that does make a lot of sense. Because think of it like this. What does Red still have at the very beginning of that game? His Pikachu, right? Probably his very first Pokemon. So, if it's true, and this might actually be a whole nother story, maybe that explains where he got his 3 starters. And it kind of makes sense. Because what happened in Pokemon Red? You got the 3 starters from other people. You got the Squirtle in Vermilion City. You got the Charmander that was north of the Nugget Bridge, from the guy who didn't believe he was training his Pokemon right. You got Bulbasaur for beating Misty in Cerulean City. And so, if that was true, then Red obviously did a very good job raising them, now didn't he? And so, when he got the Espeon, he probably realized that his rival had an Eevee, so why not go get an Eevee and evolve it into the opposite? So he had the advantage. He had the high points. But, I'm trying to think. Was Espeon weak against poison-type moves? I know psychic types are super effective against poison, but I'm trying to remember. There's a few cliches here and there. Because for the most part, when you look at like the weakness charts, the attacks that are super effective against, it's not vice versa, where, you know, you can do the same thing and it's like super effective or not very effective. But then there's some Pokemon types that I still keep forgetting about, like ghost types are super effective against ghosts. And dragons are super effective against dragons. You know, it's kind of, it is interesting, actually. So there's a few examples you have to kind of keep reminding yourself every now and again that, you know, but it's interesting to think, though. How many things we don't, like, again, how many things we don't see in the Pokemon series. And I think that makes sense because, so Red started out with Pikachu, and again, this is going based on Pokemon Yellow's logic, and then Green started out with Eevee. So they would have caught the Pokemon they did and stuck with the ones that they wanted at the time. And then Red would have stuck with the Pokemon that he had, and he would have had a balanced team then. You know, so he started out with Pikachu, got the 3 starters, got the Lapris, and he caught the Snorlax that he did, one of the 2 Snorlax on the other side of the, you know, whether he was going south of, you know, down to, from Lavender Town down to, you know, the long way home, or he went down Biker, you know, down the Cycle Road just to get to Fuchsia City, because both routes were blocked by the Snorlaxes. But, you know, with the Poke-Flute, you were able to finally do something about it, and the Snorlax obviously didn't want to wake, because Snorlax wants to eat, but then it goes back to sleep. And depending on where it decides to reside at, it doesn't want people waking it up, so then it gets mad. So that kind of makes sense. But if you have a Snorlax, Snorlax is a very powerful normal type Pokemon now, isn't it? Very powerful indeed. So, if that is the case, then that would make a lot of sense. So it's almost like Gen 2's logic was based on Gen 1. And not just its prototype, but its Pokemon Yellow version. That's actually something to think about. I did not think about it like that until now. That makes a lot of sense why we see why Red has the Pokemon that he does, and all the other ones he probably hasn't used in the PC, but give him such an enormous advantage in a lot of cases. So interesting to really affiliate with. But anyways, again, if I find any more ideas, I'll talk about them. So again, subscribe if you're not already. Donate on Patreon if you want. You don't have to, but if you want to like see more videos like this, you know, try to make it a full-time job at some point. But yeah. So yeah, and if you have any requests, let me know. But right now we're gonna just kind of talk about whatever we can get our hands on. I think more like Gen 2s. Like we're gonna jump into Pokemon Reforged a little bit. There's a lot of stuff that stayed true to the 1997 Space World demo, and it really did answer a lot of questions that people had prior, but they might have changed some of the stuff. So that kind of explains why we had things differently, and people wonder why this is the way it is now versus what it was before. But we didn't really know what it was before. It's kind of like looking back at Gen 1. A lot of people were able to figure out certain things because there was certain things in the game's data that they didn't completely remove, and some people were wondering, well, what was that all about? Like the missing, though, the Professor Oak final boss. But why was that, though? Like, why was that there? Because it was something, they put it in there because it was something else at one point. And then eventually we found out what that was now, didn't we?